couple minutes past the hour. I know we're going to have people kind of trickling in as we go. So please excuse me and my multitasking as I try to talk, type, all those things at the same time. Happy Friday, everyone. We made it. I hope you guys are having a great Friday so far. Really excited about the guest that we have for you today. Her name is Dr. Dawn Graham. She's going to be talking about switchers. Are they the future of work? First and foremost, though, I want to say hello and welcome to everybody. I know some of you are members and some of you aren't. Together Digital is a network of women who work in digital or digital adjacent fields across the country. We've got about 1,000 members, and every week we come together to do something called She Rocks, which is our chance to feature an amazing woman who has some power to share. That's really the crux of what we do at Together Digital. We're more than a networking group. We're a community of women supporting women by asking for what we need without any sense of guilt or shame, and giving without any sense of judgment. So we love it when we have women who are as accomplished and well-versed as Dawn to come to us and share their knowledge and their experience, and also talk about her book, Switchers, which I encourage you all to check out as well. We're going to go ahead and get started. Dr. Dawn Graham is a career switch coach. She's a TEDx speaker, a LinkedIn learning instructor, and the host of a popular show called Dr. Dawn on Careers on Sirius XM Radio channel 132. She's also a regular contributor to Forbes.com under the Leadership channel, and is the director for the Executive MBA program at the Horton School at the University of Pennsylvania. Her latest book, Switchers: How Smart Professionals Change Careers and Seize Success, combines her experience as a career coach, a licensed psychologist, a former corporate recruiter, and to give career switchers the strategies to break through obstacles and the jobs that they want. Dawn, it seems like you have just the resume for somebody to do this job and this work based on your background and experience. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Amy, and to everyone who's here. Appreciate it.
Yeah. So as most of you might know, and maybe not all of you, I'll be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions while we're doing this interview and they come to you, feel free to pop them in. If I don't get them to them right away, I promise I'll get to them in the chat. Also in the chat, drop in and let us know where you're listening from. We love to know where folks are tuning in from. As we know, this is virtual world now, so we could have y'all listening from anywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and start off with our questions. Like I said, if you have questions while you're listening, on Facebook or here in what am I in? I'm not in Slack. I'm in Zoom. Just drop it into the chat. Oh, TGIF. Hold on. I've got one more to admit, and I want to make sure I can let her in. There we go. Awesome. Dawn, you have a broad vantage point prior to hosting your national radio show on Sirius XM, and your role as a career director and executive MBA program at Horton. What trends are you seeing in job seekers today? I know this has been an interesting year for us.
Very interesting year. I think we've all been impacted in one way or another. And there's so many trends. I mean, I think we could spend the rest of the hour talking about those trends. But, some of the biggest ones that we're seeing were here before the pandemic, but have just been accelerated by what's happened in 2020. So we know that technology is essentially becoming a core skill no matter what job you're in. And we also know that technology is disrupting how we do pretty much every job. So it's something that we've all been really, really forced to learn this year, even if it wasn't something that we use normally. So I think that's just going to continue, and a trend that we'll continue to see as we move into 2021 and but beyond that. But we're also seeing that companies are upskilling and reskilling their employees, or at least some of them are. Actually, only about 44% are doing something, but we're going to see that more and more as companies realize that they are not able to find the talent that have the skills they need. So we've had companies like executives from Amazon, IBM, and Google, and some of these larger companies on my radio show on Sirius XM talking about all of the programs they're creating, not just for their own employees, but for the general public to learn these skills that are needed in the workplace. So I think that's going to be something that continues to grow. We're all going to need to get educated in new ways. So it's not just a one and done where you get a degree and that's going to sustain you for the rest of your career. We're going to need to get certifications. We're going to need on the job training. We're going to need so many different ways to upskill and reskill. So if your company's not doing that, either they'll start doing that, or you're going to need to manage that on your own, which is unfortunately what most of us need to do. But if we don't become proactive about managing this, we're going to be left behind, because this acceleration is not going to slow down. So those are some of the trends. Certainly there's a lot more we can talk about, but I'll certainly stop there and we can come back to that if people want to.
Well, definitely. I think it's really important. I put that question at the top for this audience in particular because our women work within digital fields. And, if you happen to be in the field of advertising or marketing, you know that in the past, everything was very siloed. There was everybody had their craft or the thing that they owned in lanes. We always had to stay in your lane. But what we're seeing happen more and more, like you're saying, with the way things are operationalizing or consolidating or restructuring or rescaling, it is impacting the workers themselves. And sometimes you're right, like you don't have the opportunity, or the company doesn't provide you the opportunity to gain the skill sets to stretch across multiple roles or to lean into new roles or make switches. So whether you're in a self-induced switch or a not so self-induced switch, I really feel like the material, the points, the trends, and the tips that you have to share with our group are really relevant based on our industry. I know it's not industry agnostic, but this industry in particular, I think we feel that pain of constantly having to keep up and kind of work towards staying in the know. But you're right, there's accessibility to that education and to that information. So I think that's like a little bit more promising. So you have a unique background in both recruiting and psychology. And in the book, you incorporate psychological principles that are important to understand in the search process. We have a lot of them in our group who are in the midst of searching for a new job. Again, like I said, because they've chosen to, or because it wasn't a choice and they're without a job right now. What are a few of these principles that you could share with us?
So there's so many things that I again want to talk about with this group, but one of the things that we're all going to become are switchers. So switchers right now is a term that is somewhat unique, but I'm happy to say that it's going to shift and it's going to be a regular part of the new career cycle. So we'll be getting a job, maybe getting some training, getting a different job, moving companies, maybe moving internally. And so, maybe doing a gig on the side, maybe doing a portfolio career. And so I don't think that we've fully embraced this mindset. Some people have, but some people still have that mindset of the very traditional career of, I'm going to learn a set of skills and this is going to sustain me. And I think one of the things that has done is it's created an issue where we have this identity. We have this identity that we are our title. And when we kind of try that on, and sort of make that our how we introduce ourselves, how we identify ourselves on our profiles, resumes, then we start to lose the ability to see ourselves as broader than that. So a couple of the other trends that we're going to see are hybrid roles. So a lot of roles that used to be very siloed are now merging together. And people who are going to be coming to the workplace with a variety of skills. So on the one hand, the companies are going to need to figure out how to manage these skills. But on the other hand, we ourselves need to kind of shed that identity and be able to see ourselves more broadly, because it's often our own mind that keeps us stuck when looking to make a career change. So, we see ourselves in one way and we can't see ourselves in another. And so one of the things I talk about in the book is that you really need to look at yourself as the value you bring to the market. You need to even introduce yourself as the value you bring to the market. And you need to look at your career as a series of maybe projects or a series of skill building, so that you're not really tied to one identity or one title or one industry or one field, because we're all going to need to be very fluid. And I know a lot of people don't like ambiguity. I'm one of them. I try and control the universe, but I think we've all learned to become much more comfortable with that this year. And that's going to be a trend that we need to continue to become comfortable with, because especially when we reach a certain stage in our career, it's pretty scary to move into a place where we don't feel that level of competence and we feel like, wow, we're the newbie on the block, and we sort of resist that. But I think that's one of the things that we're all going to have to move towards. And if you find yourself not feeling uncomfortable or not feeling stretched, then I think that's a sign you need to take a step forward and you need to do something new, because chances are that means you're not growing, and unfortunately the market won't wait for you.
That's such a good point. Those were two really good points. I just thought down there for those of you who are listening. I know we're all avid note takers. Speak your value. That's great advice. And then get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because that means you're learning and growing. And you're right. I sort of loved the whole newbie role. Like, I can just feign ignorance a lot. I didn't have to be the expert. I'm like, I'm here and I'm learning because I love learning. So I think that notion of lifelong learning is so important. I asked in the chat too, really quickly, just to survey the room, just to tell you like how big this whole switchers mentality really is. In fact, I realized I skipped over even us defining switchers, because I feel like most of us in this industry may just see that and we get it right away. I don't know if everybody does, but I was like, we kind of skipped and didn't define that. So if anybody has questions about exactly what we're talking about there, I assume you read the Eventbrite, you understand. But I asked, you talk about side hustles and how many of our listeners have side hustles, and over half of them that are listening have a side hustle. And sometimes that side hustle turns into something more. So with that, in the book, you talk about some of the mistakes. So those people who are kind of working on your side hustle, and maybe that becomes the thing that you switch with to. What are some of the mistakes that switchers make that you wish you had known before making some of your own career switches? And what are some of these jobs? What is it? What are some of these
Job
jobs?
switch killers.
I can read.
Yeah. Job switch killers. Yeah, so to kind of tag onto the side hustle piece, one of the reasons I think that's such a great thing to do is because I think one of the job switch killers, a lot of people don't try something on before going for it. So they may have a general understanding of a particular industry, or they may think, wow, this looks really interesting based on what I see on the surface, but they don't really know what it's like day to day, or maybe some of the sacrifices that they have to make in order to make that work. So that's one of the reasons I actually like a side hustle, because I think clarity comes through action. And I see people who do a side hustle, like you said, Amy, that turns into a full-time job. Or I've also seen people do a side hustle and they say, wow, this is nothing like I thought it would be. And I'm really glad I didn't just dive into this before testing it out. So I think testing it out is a really, really wise thing to do if you're looking to make a switch. I also think by testing it out, you gain skills, you build your network around it. And that's another one. One of the things that I know everybody on this call has heard, and you're probably like, yes, I've heard this a million times, is that your network really is what creates your opportunities. And I can give you a number of stats about how people get jobs and how many jobs aren't even advertised. And I think probably most people have heard those ad nauseum at this point, but it's really true. People hire people they trust. And with the competitive state that we're in right now, it's really, really difficult for hiring teams to keep up with the number of applications they're getting. And I think something that people don't realize is that the hiring process is about elimination, not selection. And so the brain works very differently when it's trying to eliminate things. And as a switcher, who's somebody who's changing industry or function or doesn't have the traditional background, you are probably pretty easy to eliminate. And so one of the reasons networking is so important is it gets you past the applicant tracking system, or gets you past those early processes and puts you in front of the decision maker. And I think that's really, really important, not just for a switcher, but for anybody who's looking for a job right now, because it is so competitive. I think one other thing that I want to bring up is that people fail to rebrand when they're making a switch. So what I mean by that is that if I'm an attorney and I want to move into product management, for example, we often hear people, because again, back to that identity clinging, I'm a lawyer, and once you say that, again, that elimination thing kicks in and it says, you're not what I want. So I think we really need to shed that identity and again, go back to the value that we bring to the market and look at what skills have we gained as an attorney that makes sense for product marketing and really present those to the market. So I say match first, stand out second, to get past that elimination process, because if you don't match first, if the first things out of your mouth aren't something that are of value to your audience, to the hiring manager, they're simply going to move on to the next candidate. So we really do need to learn to rebrand ourselves as the market changes, as the market needs change, as our skills grow. We have to be able to constantly shed, our old maybe profile, and revamp it to really show the market what we bring today. And that's not that used to be maybe a once every 5-10 year process, and now it's going to become pretty much regular. I would recommend to people that you're constantly looking at your LinkedIn and are you aligned with the market? Have you updated? Are you gaining skills? Because if you haven't gained any skills in the last year that you feel good about putting on your resume, your LinkedIn, that's a really good sign that this is a time to be proactive and ask yourself, what can I do to change that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's all great advice. And of course, I'm going to advocate for a hot second about networking because that's what we are and what we do here. And quite honestly, it is how I got to where I am today. I was a member of the organization. I volunteered. I grew my network by becoming a part of Together Digital. And then I got close with the founder. And then when she made the decision to move on to a new career field, she asked me to do this, and it was a switch. I was a creative director working for Fortune 500 brands, mostly CPG, as a creative director in a digital agency. But I'd always wanted to, I had the skill set and I had the desire to do more operations, but I wasn't going to be given that chance in an agency setting. It took my network and somebody within my network to believe in me to do that. So you kind of do kind of give a nod to that within the book, outside of just networking by creating ambassadors. Creating ambassadors. What do you mean by this? And how is that different than networking?
Yeah, creating ambassadors really has two qualities. The first quality is that they trust you and they're willing to spend their social capital on you. The second is they understand your brand and the value you bring to the market. So I think oftentimes we meet people and we think that these two things are true, but this is where that surface level networking probably isn't as valuable. And a lot of people say, yeah, but it's hard to build these relationships. And I think one of the easiest things, which I talk about in my TEDx talk, is start with the people you know, because they already fulfill that first requirement. They already trust you, you already have a relationship with them, and they're very willing to help support you in your career. And what we often don't do is the second part. We often don't share our goals with them. We often don't say, hey, this is a company I'm really interested in, or I don't know if you know, but I've been taking certification courses in IT over the last year, and I'm really looking to do this. So the people around us who want to see us succeed often don't know how they can help us because we just don't talk about those things with our neighbors or our friends or our family, or, and I think if we just took that step forward, we'd be shocked at how connected the people in our everyday lives are to the things that can help us in our career. So I think that's one of the easiest places to start. I think it's a very overlooked area. And we start having these conversations with the people who are right around us, or even dormant contacts are a great way to do this. So you probably have a lot of Facebook friends and other people who you maybe don't communicate with, but, reaching out and saying, hey, I know we don't really talk about work, but I just want to let you know, 2021 is my year to move into IT, or my year to move into product marketing. And I see that you've worked here, your spouse works there. Would you be willing to talk to me? It's amazing how many doors can open through people that are already in your network.
Absolutely. I think what you're talking about there is a big part of what we try to do here at Together Digital that makes us more than just a networking group, is that we do asks and gives, is that we insist every member ask for what it is that she needs help with. So if you happen to see, you happen to come across a LinkedIn of a member and you're like, wow, she's doing my dream job, never be shy about reaching out and saying, hey, I would love to have a coffee chat with you virtually to get to know more about what you do and how you got there. But you're right, like Dawn, it basically you own your story. You own your career path and your career journey. And so it's really about what you do with it. And what you're saying is, like, once you've worked through what you need to do internally, externally going out and saying, these are my goals to people so that they know, and then they can then in turn come back and help you. I know I've had some friends who have been like, I'm making a switch and I'm going to go take certification in this. I'm just sharing the goal with you, even though I might not have anything to do with it. but the next time I see a role or opportunity that aligns to that goal that they have, as a friend, a champion, whatever of theirs, like I'm going, or ambassador, as you call it, I'm going to send that their way.
Mhm. Yeah, I love that you guys do that in this group, the ask and the give, because I often ask people. I had somebody when this is a fun story, when I had somebody on my radio show, and she asked me, "What's your goal for this year?" And at the time, my goal for this year is to do a TED talk, and she's like, "I can help you with that."
Right.
I've since done that, but what would have happened if I hadn't had a goal? What would have happened if, I was like, I don't know, I want to make more money, or something, just kind of. And I think that's something that we all have to do. Like, if we all have to be ready for that question. Do you have a goal? And if somebody asks you, do you have an answer for that? Because I think that's part of it too, is that it takes both sides. We have to have clarity around what we want. And the more clarity we have around what we want, the more people can help us. So to just say, I'm looking for a new job, or to just say, I want to be in, company in New York. I mean, those are too big. People can't really find anything to anchor to. So you have to really think about that ask and make sure that it's understandable by the people around you so that they can actually help you.
That's so true. That's such good advice, Don. I agree. I think some of the best things that have ever happened to me is when I just leaned in and went ahead and asked for something that I needed and had that courage. Because like you said, otherwise, if you don't externally put it out, like we always say, put it out into the universe, but it's not some magical universal thing. It's just that you are letting people know what are your goals. And I know sometimes that's hard to find and define. So I just dropped in an event that we're doing in January on the 8th. It's all about value-based goal setting. And it's going to be a workshop where you can work with women who have similar value-based values as you. You do like a value assessment, then you sit down and you kind of go through and say, from a personal, professional standpoint, these are the things that I want to improve upon. And then we can help you define and brainstorm goals from there and do some time boxing. So be sure to check that out. It should be really cool because I'm one of those people, I'm highly collaborative, and I get to be a little too much of a navel gazer when I'm like looking alone to try to set goals or priorities. But let's back it up for a second and just assume like, okay, I'm not even at that point where I'm sure I'm ready to make a switch, or that I'm ready to start setting goals because I haven't defined that switch. How can someone tell if they're ready to make a switch?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because a lot of times people know first that they don't want to do what they're doing. So that's usually the first sign, is maybe you're bored, maybe just you don't see a future in what you're doing. So that's usually sign number one. Now, I always tell people, really diagnose that and understand, is it one thing? So maybe you just have a horrible boss and that's really overshadowing everything you do. So you really like the work you're doing, or you really like the company or your coworkers, but you have one thing. Or maybe your commute is just awful and it drains you, and so you really have to identify, what is that thing that's making you decide this is not right for you anymore, and is it fixable? Because maybe it is. You also have to look at your kind of life in general. So in the book, I have an assessment that's really about, are you ready to make a switch? And it asks a series of questions about what you're willing to do that, because we know job searches are hard, and certainly right now job switches are hard. So are you willing to do these things? Does this really make sense for you to do right now? And what are you willing to sacrifice, and what are you willing to do that? And then the next step is really thinking about, what have I learned over the last year? Is it aligned with the market? Am I stagnant? Am I building my network? Am I building skills that are helping me grow? Because sometimes we're actually comfortable in our role, but when we take a lens that really looks through, maybe it's your performance reviews, or maybe however you track your work, that you're like, wow, I've not really done anything new, or not built skills. This might be a good time to make a change, even if you're comfortable. So I think those are some of the things you can do to assess whether or not this makes sense for you. And then once you do that, I think one of the most important things is to figure out, you don't want to run from, you want to run to, because employers are going to be much more excited about somebody who is clear about what they want, is confident this is their next career step, is hungry to learn and do the job, versus somebody who just very excited to get out of their old job. So that's a really important thing to determine is where do you want to go, and how does it fit into your career story, and how are you going to relay that to your network and the hiring manager?
Yeah, I could say as a professional for 15 years, Dawn, that was some of the best advice I'd ever gotten is whatever you do, whenever you're thinking about switching, don't make sure that you're not running from something, that you're running to something is so, so true. I wrote it in the chat just to make sure that you all heard it and saw it, remember it, because it will save you from falling into the trap of just repeating this habit of kind of falling into the same places. Because I think our tendency is towards comfort and what's familiar. Like that's our human nature. And so
Yeah.
I love your point too, is sometimes we think red flags for switching or the cause for switching is, I lose a job, or I get a bad performance review, or I have a bad boss, or I don't like my company. But there's something to the fact that I'm just going through the motions. I'm just showing up, clocking in and clocking out. I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel like I have purpose. I don't hit a flow when I'm working. And I think that's one very big like red flag that people overlook. Like you said earlier, you have to get a little comfortable with being uncomfortable. And if you're kind of a little too nestled and settled in anymore, there's a danger there. Like you run the risk of becoming marginalized because, like you said, you're not growing, you're not learning, you're not advancing. So definitely think that makes a lot of sense for um, as a cause to kind of start to look at and switch. Now, Ty, who's with us today, she's talking about the fact that it took her 20 years to figure out that she doesn't want to do her current job anymore. Is it ever too late to be a switcher?
Oh no, never. And I really do believe that this is going to become a regular part of the career cycle, to where the term switcher isn't even used anymore. We are all going to be learning new skills. I think titles are going to be more hybrid and less siloed. And whether you ever believed you might be a switcher or not, I think if you have any length of time in your career in front of you, you are going to have to kind of get comfortable with that. So never too late. In fact, never too early. It's something that I think we all need to really embrace as the new way of work, the future of work.
Yeah. And I'm kind of curious too. I guess wasn't listed in our questions, but I'm sure you have a great answer for it because of your perspective as a career director at a university. When you're coaching, younger students, this advice, it's kind of, I feel like it's a little different than most career directors might go. They're like, oh, get your degree and you're going to go get this job and this is a job you'll stay in for life. I feel like your perspective is so different. How do you coach through recent grads or students with this philosophy in mind as they're dedicating themselves to sort of a career path?
Yeah, so it is something that I definitely preach, but I think people who are earlier in their career who are trying to figure things out recognize that they're probably going to make a lot of changes, and whatever your major is might not be what you actually end up doing. And so I think there's a little bit more expectation around that, but I also think that those questions around, I need to make my 10-year plan, I basically shut that conversation down because I'm like, that doesn't exist. Because LinkedIn published a study that 5 years ago, or the 10 most popular jobs didn't even exist 5 years ago. So it doesn't make sense to make a 10-year plan. And my philosophy to coaching is really teaching people how to manage their careers for a lifetime versus trying to get the job. And that means how to build your skills, how to market your skills, so what your brand is, how to build your network, and how to go through those steps a number of times so that you're ready for the next career. And how do we even assess jobs? When I ask them, I have 2 job offers, how am I going to decide? And it used to be money, right? Everybody said, oh, this one's paying more. That's it. But it's not money. It's which one is going to enhance your skill sets for the future of work? Which one is going to introduce you to a network that's going to expand your circles of people and introduce you to potential opportunities? So these are some of the things that we talk about at Wharton, so that people don't just get a job, but that people get a plan that they can use throughout their entire career.
That's great. That's really wise advice. And I feel jealous of those kids that are coming out of college getting such great advice, because it's the kind of stuff that I think a lot of us could have used. Looking back, I started my first year of college was pre-med. I was working at a pharmaceutical research company when I learned that there was such a thing as marketing. And then I decided to go back to it, or I decided to go back to school. And I worked during the day and went to school at night. And during the day, I made the switch to work at an office that was a graphic design firm, because I'm like, that's more adjacent to the thing that I'm doing. So I know that if I'm in that environment and while I'm going to school, if I don't love it, then I shouldn't be doing it. And that's how I learned I didn't want to do medicine.
Yeah, I mean, clarity through action. There's a perfect example of that. And, I think most of us, if we really look at our careers, not look at our LinkedIn profiles or our resumes, but if we really look at our careers, there's a lot of happenstance in there. There's a lot of, wow, I didn't see that come. I mean, I was with Arthur Anderson when the Enron scandal happened 2 decades ago. I didn't see that coming. And that's actually what inspired me to get into career management, because I had I did have my 10-year plan. I loved my company. I loved what I was doing. I was growing. I was getting promoted. I, saw my future there. And then within, one phone call, my future was totally crushed. And then it's like, now what? But I think that's what we all really need, is we need to be able to be ready for these potential unexpected changes, whether your company merges or we have a pandemic, didn't see that coming. These things are going to continue to happen in different ways. And that's what I really try and coach my students on, is you have to be ready at all times. And I'm not saying you have to walk around anxious, but if you're not continuously building your skills, continuously building your network, making sure you're visible and people know your brand, that when something like that does happen, if it does, you're going to feel like totally lost. But if you've been doing all of those things, you're going to not feel as anxious, because you're going to know you have the network, and that network and your branding and all the work you've been doing has created a safety net for you for your next opportunity.
I agree. Ty is saying that she could have used this advice 20 years ago. I'm with you, girl, but here we are.
Me too. Yeah, I know. I could have too, for sure.
Oh, that's so funny. Oh, funny and not. We had a question come in from one of our viewers. She says, what if you want to go back? For example, I have a master's in a field that I don't currently work because I fell in love with marketing. Now I don't feel fulfilled with the work. How do we backtrack to something that we enjoy and have training in, but don't have the work history? So this is probably like that gap question. This is a big gap, it sounds like.
Yeah, so this is an interesting question too, because a lot of people, this is what I meant when I say you kind of have to look at all of your skills, because it sounds like you've done some of the requisite education for a field that you want to get into. And so now the question becomes, how do you get that applied experience? And I think that's the thing that a lot of people struggle with, because even right now, they'll maybe go get a certificate in something, or they'll go get, some type of code academy or some type of credential. And the question becomes from the employer, well, what's your applied experience? And so it's one of those things that I think we do have to close the gap on, because there's so many great credentialing programs, but not all of them have this applied experience. So if you've already gotten the credential in what you want to do, and you're kind of looking to close that gap, there's a number of ways you can create that experience for yourself. And one of the ways you might want to do is a self-created internship. You don't need a formal company to do that. There might be an organization that is doing what you're wanting to do, that would be happy to have a volunteer or somebody to, whatever that work experience is, to do that for them, because they're short on resources. And I think that's one of the best ways. Perhaps people in the field from when you were in that degree program who are working the field. Maybe you contact them and say, hey, I've pivoted after this, but I'm looking to get back into it. Can I come and shadow you and meet some of the people at your company? So again, going back to those referrals. Again, not sure what the career is, but maybe you create a side gig and see if you can generate some experience that way. So it's hard to tell without knowing exactly what that degree is in, but we have to get creative. And I think that's one of the things that that we're not always taught. We're taught, oh, you have to look online and somebody has to pay you to do this and somebody has to choose you. But I say nobody has to choose you. You can choose you, and you can choose to create an opportunity for yourself that opens the door. And so forget looking online for that next step, and instead create it yourself.
That's great. That's awesome advice. I was just messaging her and letting her know that she can come off of mute and come on if she wants to share a little more context for you. That way you can
Yeah, that would be helpful. Yeah.
specifically on what it is that she needs. But I think even just from a general sense, that's amazing, great advice. And then I also think the one thing I jotted down earlier that I had somebody say to me, a former coworker and friend of mine was talking about they're building a whole new network, and their basis is the fact that reputation precedes your resume. And I think all of these things, credentials, and then the initial, like, the drive of your own personal drive to try to better yourself, educate yourself, shadow, job shadow or intern at any stage of your life or career. I think just in building your network and finding your ambassadors are all going to help kind of build that reputation that you're looking for and position yourself that you won't be so worried about that crazy gap that might have been in between when you pursued something different than what you graduated for. That was a great question. So thank you for asking. All right. What makes switchers unique?
What makes switchers unique? Well, right now, that question is or that answer is gonna be different than maybe 5 years from now when they're not so unique. But I think one of the things that in our current market is that the hiring process, the job search process that many companies use are really not set up for switchers. And I think that's one of the biggest hurdles right now, is that we tend to use 98%, I think is the current stat, of companies use applicant tracking systems, which are essentially matching databases. And when you think about the idea of matching, a switcher doesn't fit into that category because switchers tend not to have that traditional career path that they're looking for. Now, does this mean that they don't have the ability to do the job? Absolutely not. In the same way that maybe you have 10 years of sales experience, does that mean you're a great salesperson? No, it just means that you have 10 years of experience, maybe being the worst salesperson on every team you've been on. So we haven't really come up with a way to hire switchers in the marketplace, which is one of the things that I'm a big advocate for, is to find better ways to recruit and hire talent, because this is not going to be sustainable, especially as we move to hybrid roles. We know people are working longer. They have a variety of different experiences that can really benefit the company. But if the company is just looking for key titles or number of years of experience, or even education, there's a stat I read that about 6 million jobs now require a degree that never required a degree before. Because personally, why do I think that's the case? I think that's the case because it goes back to that elimination. It's really easy if I get 200 applicants, if I slap a degree requirement up there for half of them to get knocked out if they don't have that degree. Now, if you ask those same hiring managers, why is a BA relevant? And it doesn't even matter. Is it a BA in creative dance, or it doesn't even matter.
Right.
They probably won't have an answer for you. So I think some companies are starting to realize this, and we're seeing some of the Apple and Hilton and IBM, some of them say, okay, degree is not going to be a differentiator anymore, because that's not necessarily going to work. But I think that's what makes switchers unique right now, is that there's not a great way for switchers to get in front of that decision maker, which is where that networking, that rebranding, that investing first. So to go back to the question from a few minutes ago, a hiring manager wants to see that you've invested, not that they're a little bit afraid of switchers because they want to make sure you didn't just wake up on a whim and say, I really want to do this now. They want to know you're invested. And the more you can show them you're invested, whether that's creating your own internship, volunteering, joining associations, writing about it, maybe posting on social media about the work you're doing, or commenting, being really active in groups. There's so many ways you can show that you're invested in a topic. Then they start to recognize you as somebody who's serious about making the switch. So I think a lot of the onus right now is on the actual job seeker, the switcher, to demonstrate and prove that this is something that they really want. But the good news is there are ways to do it. And your network can be a great way to get around those applicant tracking systems and other hurdles so that you can at least get your shot in front of the hiring manager.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I feel like as you're talking that I feel like there's an opportunity, or there's a lot of talent that potential employers are leaving on the table by relying on these systems. But I understand like the abundance of resumes and things like that. You have to make things sometimes easier to get through. I kind of made me think too about, I don't know if you've heard the term multi-potentialite.
Yeah, I have.
And I feel like we have a whole channel in our Slack group for Together Digital that's all about multi-potentialites. I was kind of curious, like as we're looking at that kind of phenomenon being discussed and evolving, what would be some of your advice, your career advice to those multi-potentialites? Because I feel like there's a lot of us out there.
Yeah, and so I think it's true, and I think that's a huge asset. There's a book that that I like. I just put it in one of my Forbes articles about Sarah Beth Burke wrote about hybridity, and I don't know if you've heard of that book, but it's really a great delve into this idea of, you know, we all have this variety of skills and abilities. And I just actually posted something on my Instagram that relates to this. Just because it hasn't been tested doesn't mean you can't do it. Right. So, you know, and I think that's really what Switchers is all about. It's really about ability, because we know that companies are having to think about talent management for roles that don't even exist today. So they don't even have the basic framework of what skills do I need, or what does success look like in this role. And so granted, that's a huge challenge, but if you don't start looking at you know, how skills are transferable, or how different experiences you know, create potential, then we're really losing out on a major way to not only grow our internal talent and use it to its fullest capacity, but to, you know, companies have this idea right now of buying the perfect talent versus creating that inside their organization. And Michelle Weiss, who wrote the book Long Life Learning, just came out in November, highly recommend, talks about the fact that, you know, sometimes people have in your organization of 70% of the capabilities to do that job that you're struggling to hire for. But if the company doesn't know it, they can't take that person and train them that 30% of the way. Instead, they're searching for the perfect candidate. And so I think that's going to be something that needs to shift as well. So yeah, I mean, again, this is a great topic for a whole other webinar.
Yeah, right. That's a whole nother hour, maybe. No, that's great. That's awesome. We had another comment and question come in, so I'm going to read it. It says, this is very interesting as we're preparing our high school sophomore to plan and think about college and a career. Starting next year is an opportunity to take dual credit classes. Tuesday, we have a meeting to go over his Highland Ability Battery Assessment. I don't even know what that is. My kids are like 7 and 3, so I'm sure I'll know at some point. What a great term to weave into your interviews and discussions with potential clients and hiring staff, the multi-potentialites. Mm-hmm. So what does anybody know? What is the Highland Ability Battery Assessment?
Yeah,
you have to send it to me, Wendy. I don't know I feel like I need to be prepared. And I'm kind of curious. I feel like even as a 40-year-old woman, I still want to constantly be assessing, like, what are my skills? What am I doing well? Where do I need to grow? So I'm like, can I do this thing? And I also shared the book Lifelong Learning link in the chat as well, in case anybody missed that and wanted to jot it down. So what are some fears that hold back job switchers, and how can they begin to address them?
Yeah, I think the biggest fears come, you know, from within inside our own brain. I mean, the brain is designed to protect us, and I think that's a good thing. So, you know, when it sees risk, we tend to move away from risk, and certainly making a career switch or taking on a job that isn't as familiar is scary for all of us, especially if we've attained success in our career and are very comfortable knowing our day-to-days and being able to answer questions and kind of go with the flow. So I think one of the things that I tell myself is if I'm not experiencing some type of fear, I'm not growing. And this idea of that we all feel about imposter syndrome and things like that, that's how I kind of get past that. I tell myself, if I'm feeling this, I'm stretching, I'm doing something that is outside my comfort zone, which means that I'm growing. So I think we need to reframe how we, these feelings of anxiety, and reframe them as excitement, and the fact that it's evidence that we're taking the next step, and that, yeah, this is how we're supposed to feel when we're doing something that is new and is outside of our competence. So that's something that I think that really gets in the way of switching. People are also worried about making the wrong decision, and is this, and they get really stuck in this analysis paralysis stage and all this research. But one of the things that can really help that is again, going back to that clarity through action. Do something, do anything, take one small step. So you don't have to look at it as this huge boulder in front of you, but chip off one little piece. Have one conversation with somebody. Volunteer at somewhere, volunteer to shadow somebody. You just have to take one step, and as you take those steps forward, you start to see the next step and the next step. It's really difficult when you're first starting any type of switch to see the entire plan in front of you, and even if you did, it would probably change anyway. So
Right.
don't overwhelm yourself with I have to know everything, but also don't get so kind of mired down in all of these thoughts that you don't take some action so that you can say, yeah, well, this is what I expected, or no, this isn't what I expected.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you hit the nail on the head, because it's funny, in the comments, as I asked that question, those fears, some people volunteered them. Imposter syndrome was absolutely one, and failure was another. So I think your reframing is, I've used that a lot. Instead of thinking I'm so anxious about, I'm so nervous about, I'll be like, I'm excited to be able to do da 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 da. Because again, when you reframe it, even in your mind and your own self-talk, then all of a sudden my brain goes, okay, yeah, why am I excited about that? What about it makes me excited? And then I actually start to get a little excited. So you can do that. You can retrain your brain a little bit to sort of reframe and look at those, at failure as something that you're okay with, that you're comfortable with, that you're like, I'm going to learn something. I'm going to try and I'm going to learn.
And I see that in the chat, and I think to myself, what is failure? Because we all have our own definition of that. So what is failure, and is it really as catastrophic? I mean, as a licensed psychologist, I'm a master at catastrophizing. So I can go from this little mistake to, oh my God, I'm going to get fired and I'm going to be homeless. Like this is where my mind goes, and I know it. I'm like, okay, I'm catastrophizing here. Like, calm down, backtrack. But what is failure? I mean, is failure getting laid off? Is failure not being the superstar on the team? Is failure not making as much money? I mean, everybody has this idea of failure, and I think however you define it, you just need to flip it and say, wait a minute, that's a very myopic view of this opportunity, because honestly, failure needs to be part of your plan in some way. And when I say failure needs to be part of your plan, I really mean hurdles. There are going to be hurdles. There's going to be things that don't work out the way you expected or planned, and that doesn't necessarily mean that it's failure. It just means that it's a constraint, and sometimes those constraints are the things that actually lead us to the creative avenues that take us to where we want to go. So I think we have to be careful with that word failure and how we define it, and expecting that there won't be hurdles.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. That's wonderful advice. I wholeheartedly agree. It's been a very scary year, I think, for all of us. So again, without those risks, there is no reward. We're going to back it back up a little bit here to those who are job searching, maybe not switching, because I feel like you have plenty of valuable advice. And I know a lot of our members, and even non-members who are listening right now, are currently in the midst of looking for a job, which is really difficult, I know. But what are some ways that candidates can address, oh wait, I skipped ahead. How can job candidates get inside the head of a recruiter or hiring manager?
Yeah, so I think this is really important, because I think we all have this idea of the hiring managers well trained. They're looking at this as a selection process, and all of these things that are actually just fallacies. I'll be honest with you. I ask my students all the time, my executive students, how many people have hired? Every single one raises their hand. How many have had 8 hours of training at least? No one raises their hand. So I think we need to understand what we're going into. Hiring managers hate hiring because it takes them away from their day job. And so they want to get it done as efficiently as possible. They don't like taking risks either, which is why if you're a switcher, or even if you're not, you have to take on the onus 100% of delivering in that interview the value you bring to solve their problems. Sometimes they don't even, they can't decipher and kind of pick apart and say, yeah, this I'll take, that I don't. They really need you to just tell them very outright. And I always say, do the work for them. I also think that because they're not trained, they don't always know what they're looking for. So again, they often get better as they interview people. They are very subject to bias, like halo and horn effects, or confirmation bias, and these other things that cause them to make decisions based on something other than qualifications. And so this isn't meant to slam hiring managers. The fact is they are, this is not their day job. So they're not experts in it. But I think when we realize that, we recognize that it's up to us as the job seeker to make sure we work hard to practice and know what we want to leave on the table, regardless of the questions we're asked, and recognize that we may get strange questions that aren't relevant, or all of these other things. But I think that's something that we need to get over. The hiring process is not logical. It's certainly biased, and there's a lot of hurdles that we often don't think about. That I think once we start thinking about that and getting into the mind of the hiring manager, we recognize they don't actually care if we're a switcher. They don't actually care about any of these things. What they care about are, we're going to be responsible, show up, make them look good, and not need a lot of handholding. And if as a candidate, you can relay that confidence in them, then you're going to get the job.
That's a great point. That's awesome advice. I did put into the chat that we're going to open the last 5 minutes or so up for questions, because I hope that you all have some. If not, the last one that I was going to ask you today, Dawn, was still kind of related to those ones who are looking for a job. But even if you're switching or not switching, negotiation is a big topic among especially women. So whether they're switchers or not, what are some of your top tips for negotiating job offers?
Yeah, it's a favorite topic. And I think one, always sleep on it. Always, always, always. Never accept on the spot, even if somebody gives you, everything you wanted, because there's always going to be something that you can't think of in the moment. When you get a job offer, especially if you really want the job, we're overcome with emotion and we're not really thinking rationally. So oftentimes when you sleep on it, you think of something that maybe it's start date, maybe it's extra vacation, maybe it's a bonus. I'll never forget, in my very, very, very first job, I didn't ask for a sign-on bonus and found out a few months in, every single other person got one. And I said to my boss, why didn't I get one? And she said, you didn't ask. So yeah. So
Always ask.
It's a hard lesson. I also think you have to assume positive intent. I think one of the reasons we get so nervous when we're negotiating is because we look at it as a conflict situation, me against them. And I think that's the wrong mindset to approach it with. I think we need to look at it as, hey, they asked me to take this job. They want me. They've gone through the process. They've chosen me. They want me to come on happy and do a great job. I want this job, and I want to come on happy and motivated to do a great job. So I think we have to go in assuming we're on the same team, which reduces a little bit of the anxiety, and be able to have that conversation. So I think that's another thing that I often see people go in guns blazing. Here's all the reasons I deserve more money, and saying, let's have a discussion. I also think it's really a great way to build your relationship with your hiring manager, because this is the first difficult conversation you're going to have. And it's an opportunity to see, is this person going to go to bat for me, or You're going to toe the company line. So I often say, if you can have that conversation with the hiring manager versus the HR person, or, you know, external recruiter, whoever, that's going to be a really good thing, so that you can start to see what your relationship's going to be like. So those are some of my tips. Of course, I would tell people always start with the base, and, you know, definitely always know what your value is to the market, because it's definitely based on your value. And don't be afraid to ask. My favorite way to ask is there any flexibility? Because this is a way to do it without negating the contract, but, you know, opening the dialogue. So I think those are some of my favorite negotiating tips.
Those are great. I love it. Yeah, those were good rapid fire ones. I threw in a link, everybody, to the book, to Switchers. I also threw a link to Dawn's website, so you can also check out and listen to her podcast. It's also on Sirius XM Radio, where you could probably get even more. I feel like this hour went so fast, Dawn.
It really did.
All such great advice. Thank you, everyone, for your comments, your questions. If we don't have any more, let me check over on Facebook real quick. I don't want to neglect you all over there. If there's no other questions or anything, Dawn, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your experience and your wisdom. I love all that you do. I love that fusion of career psychology and career direction. It's a very cool thing that you're doing. So thank you for all you do, and thank you for being with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Amy. And I hope everybody will check me out on LinkedIn and link in with me. Let me know you saw me here. But thanks, Amy. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. We'll talk soon. Take care, Dawn. Bye, everybody. Have a great rest of your Friday.